wa ta'ala and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask him subhanahu wa ta'ala mighty and exalted to shower his mercy and blessings on our teacher, messenger and leader Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family, his companions and those who follow in their footsteps to the day of judgment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make all of us gathered here this evening amongst them. Ameen. We are 15 days and counting midpoint into the blessed month of Ramadan. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from all of you. It's a Ramadan like no other Ramadan before. So definitely different this year. But hopefully the reward would be the same or and even more, inshallah, than the years before. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us acceptance and sincerity. So with this, I hope you could see my screen in the footsteps of the companions, crisis management, controlling the narrative. So this is a series that was maybe put together about 8 years ago. And subhanAllah, it comes in very handy in light of this whole COVID-19 situation. So there's an outline about, the scope and, introducing John C. Maxwell, who's a guru in crisis management. How's that related to an Islamic narrative here? We'll see really quick, and hopefully I could do this in 12 minutes. So I'm going to go as fast as I can. So with this said, I'll skip a few slides. The objective here is to trace this major transformation in many lives, of the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, identify milestones in their life and see what we could learn from that and use as examples that we can apply in our own lives. And this goes to, I don't know if you could see my screen. Okay. Are we good to go? Yes. Okay. So turn the companions into models of behavior references. I'm going to try again. I think you could see my screen. Please chat me. Yeah. Please chat me if you cannot. Let's see here. Okay, great. Okay, Jazakumullah khairan. So you can see my screen. I have confirmation. So turn the companions into models of behavior references to ourselves, children, and families. So with this said, this is a very practical approach, I would say. So, give me some examples that I can use, right now or tomorrow, and use that for my own kids and my own, in my own community, Masjid, الدعوة or Ibn Sina Center and the likes. So with that said, I'm quoting here from John C. Maxwell, and this is topic specific, developing the leader within. And you'll see how, and obviously Mukhtasar Ibn Kathir is a nice reference, for the narratives or the history of the companions. So what is crisis management? Crisis management is a crisis, by definition, is a major event that threatens to harm. It's obviously a COVID-19 type of situation, right? It's a crisis. And crisis management is basically a process by which, we're going to neutralize this harm. How can we overcome it? And basically how can we make sure that we emerge, sort of like even stronger out of this situation, or out of this hardship, right? Or difficulty. So with that said, they're very particular, as John C. Maxwell narrates, or as he teaches in his book, very particular characteristics about crisis: threat, surprise, and short time for decision making. Isn't that the case? Given the situation that we're in, should we close our masjid? Should we not? And what we're going to do? And we're going to have a Ramadan or not? And so many decisions that needed to be made, right? And as a result, I wanted to maybe share with you um, basically how he approaches this and how's that related to maybe the life of one of the greatest of Sahaba. So John C. Maxwell says, look, there are 5 sort of like successful competencies here, or successful characteristics here, that you need to implement, or you need to make sure that you apply when it comes to a crisis situation. Building environment of trust. People have to trust. You have to have integrity. You have to have buy-in with people. Okay. Number 2, reforming group mindset is very important. So if you want people to unite and push in one direction, you have to make sure that they share, a common understanding. Otherwise, they be confused. Identifying obvious vulnerabilities, and that's interesting and important. You have to successfully say well, this is like a health pandemic. This is like a serious issue. This is like a life death situation or something like this. So you have to identify this as a health crisis or whatever, and obviously let people know what we're looking at. Making wise and rapid decisions, which is an oxymoron of a sort. How could you make wise yet rapid, quick, on your feet, chop, chop? It's time to make decisions and they better be wise. That's a challenge. But the wisdom also comes from the relativeness and the responsiveness of the decision, right? So it's a very, it's a relative term, granted, but it's very responsive to the situation. So the wisdom comes from that. Obviously, it has to be a smart decision, right? Leaving from crisis to affect change. And hey, inna ba'da al-usri yusra, can you maybe build a good enough momentum so you emerge from difficulty to ease? Inna ba'da al-usri yusra. And this is what we hope and pray, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us something better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us like a lot of hidden gifts throughout this whole crisis. So here's the narrative. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, at the age of 56 years old, is afflicted with something called Amur Ramada. And Amur Ramada is the year of the famine, major crisis that would test the strength and test his strength and examine his resolve. Is he, what is he made of? Is he gonna be able to overcome this problem or not? And then, this was maybe a few years back. The audience would mostly like high school and college students, and this issue always came up. Is that the purpose of creation? لِنَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Is that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test us? This is one of the ways that Allah tests us. And why does he need to do that? And there's a whole bunch of questions. Why does Allah have to prove that, we are worthy of a reward? Why can he just conclude that on his own? Why do we have to go through trials and tribulations? A lot of philosophical narratives here and a lot of theories, and it's cross-cutting all religions, right? It's an issue not only with Islam but with other religions as well. But and the issue of, wait, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala know already what's going to happen? And the answer is yes, but does he control how I'm going to react, to a situation or a crisis or a problem or a difficulty? That is my decision to make, and the issue of free will, and is a whole bunch of discussions. But it's interesting at least to walk away from this slide saying, listen, one of the reasons, the main reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, amongst the number of reasons for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to worship and so on, to worship him and so on, is also to test us. لِنَبْلُوَكُمْ, who is best in deeds, أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. So with this said, we go to this year of Ramada, or this year of the famine. Disaster strikes. Omar, is going to the principal of this school of crisis management, is gonna show up, and he's gonna save the day. How is he gonna do that? Well, just give you a bit of a background. The color of land. And Omar, this is not his only crisis, by the way. So he was actually had to deal with another crisis called Ta'un Amwas, which is another health pandemic, right? Uh, he dealt with military crisis too. He dealt with a number of crises, but I just picked this one because I wanted to showcase the overlap between these 5 principles of John C. Maxwell, saying, listen, as a successful leader, as a successful community, this is how you should approach, address, and mitigate crisis. And how Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh and the Muslim community of Medina sort of successfully followed that game plan by John C. Maxwell, or actually John C. Maxwell followed the game plan of Umar ibn al-Khattab, which is very intriguing and kind of mind-boggling and absolutely intellectually enjoyable to kind of wrestle with these kind of ideas. But here we go. So year 17th or 18th of Hijrah, the year that marked the big drought, the famine, the hunger, no rain, no food, resulting in both natural and economic crisis and so on. And does that sound familiar? The whole idea of the health pandemic right now, COVID-19, is linked to an economic recession, right? An economic crisis, right? And obviously the disruption in the supply chain and the fact that people, cannot, do day-to-day activities and so on, all that impacts the economy for sure. And there is a direct link and correlation between, the health pandemic and obviously the state of the economy. That's why you got your 2 trillion US dollars in stimulus package, right? So 60,000 of nomad Bedouin Arabs descended on the city of Medina, and in addition to the 40,000 residents of the city of Medina on the 17th year of Hijrah, 7 years after the death of the messenger and under the Khilafah or the leadership of Umar ibn al-Khattab, he's looking at how many people here? 100,000 people that he's going to have to worry about, okay? What is he going to do? So there are four challenges he's looking at. Okay, this leader of ours, Umar ibn al-Khattab, the nomad Arabs, Bedouins, they are a threat to the city of Medina because they have very weak faith. They might memorize a couple of ayat from the Quran, but as I was mentioning earlier with Dr. Akram, the important dimension here that you have to know the purpose for which these ayat were revealed, what these ayat are intended to achieve, how is it supposed to be life-changing in terms of conduct and behavior and so on, right? They come from remote places, they didn't have any teachers, they know a couple of ayat from the Quran, they acting like these wild cowboys sort of in Medina. So that's a problem. How is he going to deal with that? He extends a public invitation every day to 10,000 people. So a public invitation, and then he delivers, to the rest of the residents of Medina if they are in need. But this is like literally like a spread of food for 10,000 people. If you've ever gone to Umrah or Hajj or something like that, and you sit down, outside the Haram or something, and people have lots, about 10, 15, 20, 30 people are eating all together, which is something unusual to us living here. We're talking about 10,000 people or kind of like eating one food spread, and it's he's doing this on daily basis, right? And obviously he has he has his own deputies and he has a whole system, and basically he has a supply chain and he's able to aggregate the portions of food, and he has this whole issue of ihsa. I want to count how many people are being fed today versus tomorrow, and he's running his dashboards and he's looking at what are my data points here, am I increasing, decreasing, am I able to meet demand, and he's doing all this interesting stuff that Governor Como and on all these smart leaders are doing right now. Okay, so another issue which is amazing in terms of Umar ibn al-Khattab, he's able to actually use this. He's able to take to engage these folks. So we're talking about building an environment of trust, integrity. They trusted him enough to the point that he was able to enlist them. He had a recruitment issue in terms of the army. And with these nomads, he was able to conquer lands as far as Egypt and as far as like greater Syria and Iraq. Also, he had a major concern about the barrier between the city and the suburb, or the people living deep in the desert and the people living in the city of Medina. And basically, it doesn't have full societal integration. So these people are not talking to each other. They kind of have, sort of a divide, and he doesn't have a well-integrated community. And that was a challenge. So he was able to leverage this crisis to introduce this whole integration initiative between the desert and the city. Okay, a second challenge that he has, that he experienced or he had, is the different states, no ties of mutual support. So again, he was able to tie these different states, these different locales, or these different regions, if you will, in the Arabian Peninsula. The whole entire peninsula is under his leadership, but these people are not communicating, they are not integrating, they are not sort of like moving in this one direction. And he's able to leverage this crisis to affect this integration change that he envisioned. He enacted principle of takaful, which is what we talked about, that people have to support one another. It's just an Arabic term for supporting one another and feeling for one another and empathy and stuff like that, and calls, for help. So he sends messages to, all the different Muslim states, at the time. And even he's able to, one of his governors, Amr ibn al-As, is able to actually dig a gulf or a canal, I should say, which, between the Nile and the River Nile and Red Sea in order to sort of create this new trade route. So he's again finding opportunities within the crisis in the ba'd al-usri yusra type of approach to this, right? So a second challenge that he had is the issue of consumerism. Okay, so Umar ibn Khattab was extremely distressed and concerned, excuse me, about this whole issue of consumerism. What we're talking about here, there's significant increase in wealth because of the spoils of war coming from Egypt, Iraq, and Syria, and so on. So, people are too comfortable. People are too heedless. How is he going to deal with that? An executive order. No man eats, meat back-to-back days. Executive order, a second executive order. People are commanded, to eat only half of their, regular portions. So basically, culturally, they have a specific portion, and he says, okay, so you need to give out half of your food. This whole issue of takaful, of mutual support of one another, or otherwise a keto diet, mandatory diet. So with that said, a third challenge of his was the literist movement. The literist movement is an issue because he's going to suspend here some laws, and these laws are not just some man-made laws. These are laws in the Quran. These are legislations, Quranic legislations, and basically, who's going to have the courage to say, hey, I'm going to suspend the punishment for stealing, or something like that. And that was Omar. He had the courage. He showed up when decision needed to be made, and talking about making rapid and wise decisions. He says, look, I have a story here. Basically, these guys stole from their employer, and he did not punish them, the Hatib ibn Abi Balta. And he says, look, I'm going to punish you for starving them while you are putting them to labor. It's your obligation, it's your responsibility to take care of your own employees. And we get some good employment laws from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab if we dig deep enough, right? And then we talked about suspending that punishment for 2 years until and the whole idea, right? We are not paying, I don't know, we are not paying in the state of New York, we're not paying mortgages, for example, because it has been suspended because people are unable to work, or they're, and so on. So he actually did this. He actually suspended, even laws, in order to address this situation. Because again, this whole concept of, no, I'm just not applying the rule because it just, it has to be applied. I have to apply the rule because it's intended to achieve a purpose or a goal. If that cannot be achieved, which is called the illa, or the reasoning behind it, then that rule is null and void, or at minimum suspended for a period of time. He has a timeline here of 2 years. The last challenge that he has is basically the role model challenge. Is, look, you have to lead by example. Listen, you can give like a lot of great lectures, but when it comes to time for people to fast or something like that, you can be the one eating openly in the daytime of Ramadan. It's just people will be like, if you come to Taraweeh or something like that and give a lecture, people will be like, who is this guy again who just broke his fast? You have to live up to the ideals that you call people towards, and it's just that it's a given. So he really was extremely harsh and extremely conservative and extremely sort of like military when it came to governing his own nafs, and sort of like curbing his own desires. And he wanted to lead by example, and by God, he succeeded with flying colors. He did extremely well. So this like white man from Quraysh turned dark because he just for 2 years he did not eat anything except oil and bread. And there's so many different stories there, and so many different stories about like walking for miles and miles and asking for a ride when his just feet completely failed him. He asked for a ride from this kid who was just had a camel ride, or a mule rather, or something like that, right? So people will be like, my God, it's just, look at this man. This is the leader, the commander in chief, leading by example. The story of the woman who was fake cooking too, is a very famous one during the time of Umar. And then he run because her kids are starving, and she's just fake cooking, putting some water and stuff like that until the kids, boiling water until the kids fall asleep. He runs to the house of the treasury, and he carries himself flour and stuff from, in order to make food, and he cooks the food himself. So the man has to wake up the next morning and feed 100,000 people, and he has to manage a very sophisticated supply chain, and he has to mitigate this like overwhelming risk, and he has to lead people in terms of morale and in terms of like drafting a vision for how we're going to get out of this situation. He is like cooking, for the kids of this woman and so on. And people are in shock that this is the man who's the leader, of this whole community. And then let people in public istighfar and salatul istisqa, which is the salah taught by the Prophet ﷺ to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rain. And obviously, this is another realm, the spiritual realm, the connecting people. One of the very sort of like endowed genius, people who in terms of leadership are the ones who successfully able to connect the cause to the need. You say, look, there's something here, a goal that needs to be achieved, and there is a need if I match them. And he successfully is able to connect people in terms of this crisis to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who's able to relieve them out of this difficulty in different. And what's the system here that he's going to use? He's going to use the public istighfar. That's one system. He's going to use another system for salah and all these different manifestations of worship. Okay, so the question in conclusion, did Omar apply the 5 steps of successful crisis management by John C. Maxwell? And we can go here and see, yes, he built an environment of trust. He was able to reform group mindset. Yes, I mean, he was successfully moving 100,000 people in one direction. That's reforming group mindset. Identifying, obvious like issues and vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Yes, he was able to say we have a food insecurity situation. We have a drought situation. We have a food supply disruption situation, and so on. He was able to manage these things, articulate exactly and clearly. And this is very important, that you have to successfully, be able to identify in clear terms what is the issue, what is the problem. That's important. People actually pay money for clarity. People hire consultants for thousands of dollars for clarity, to just tell them what is the problem with my business. Right? And making wise and rapid decisions. Yes, these executive orders, that. And even from crisis affecting change. In other words, finding opportunities within challenges. And yes, he recruited folks to the army. He was able to, sort of remove these divisions between city and suburb, or between desert and city, and so on. So in conclusion, the dilemma is always boiling down to this: theory versus application. Are you going to live up to the ideal? Are you going to walk the walk, not just talk the talk? That's always a problem, right? And especially if you're a leader, you better lead by example, and you better not have discrepancies, in terms of your behavior, because people are going to start getting confused. The downside of discrepancies is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you cannot, your outer manifestation has to match your, what you do at home, and or what is public has to match what's private, and so on and so forth. And that's extremely important for a leader, is to lead by example, and people see that you're implementing some of these measures to your own self and your own household. And Omar was notorious for that, implementing very stringent measures to his own household, to his son Abdullah, and to the whole entire Khattab clan, or his whole entire family. He's a subject matter expert, of course. I mean, these principles, were implemented not only once or twice, but throughout his, years of leadership. Where do we go from here? The answer is, can we like learn some of these examples and implement them in our own community? Case in point, this whole COVID-19 situation. This was put together maybe about 8 years ago. It's not directly, relevant, but I think it still makes sense in light of this whole, situation that we're in. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this time and make it solely and sincerely for His sake. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us ikhlas and qabul, sincerity and acceptance, and to benefit with these words and make it heavy in your scale and my scale on the day of judgment. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the companionship of Umar ibn al-Khattab and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the righteous companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and to grant us, access to the highest level of paradise, and to avail us from the torment and the punishment of the hellfire. Allahumma ameen wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.